FDA gets some new authorities for record inspection and maintenance. This is pretty important. Similar to the Food Facility Registration, FSMA is expanding FDA's authority here, and it's for food manufacturing, processing, and distribution records. FDA now has two ways to reach these kinds of records. The first way is if the food appears to be adulterated. Not appears to be, but there's a reasonable belief that the food is adulterated. FDA had access to the records related to the manufacture of the food and distribution of the food. That's not new. FDA had to have a reasonable belief that the food is adulterated and presents a threat of serious adverse health consequences or death. FDA can get to those records. But there's an expansion. There's a new route. The new route under the FSMA is FDA having a reasonable probability that the use of or exposure to the food would cause serious adverse health consequences or death to humans or animals. So that's an additional requirement. Under either one of these routes, though, FDA gets greater access to records. Under the new provision now, FDA can obtain records for not just the food that they have the evidence about, right, either the reasonable belief or the reasonable probability about it being adulterated or presenting a serious risk, but they also can now get records for any other article of food that FDA reasonably believes is likely to be affected in a similar manner. So this is reaching other foods that they think, if you've got a problem in this food, you probably have the problem in that one, so we want the records for that one too. That's very expansive as far as the FDA's power, which is pretty significant. The other thing to keep in mind here is that both routes of these record access authorities, regardless of which one FDA takes, either of them could then lead to a revocation of a facility registration or initiation of a mandatory food recall. So this is dramatically opening the funnel essentially to FDA, allowing them to get to some of those other authorities because they can reach these other foods that they don't have direct evidence for, but it's the kind of food that FDA thinks could be similarly affected by the problem that they know about. There's some additional record keeping for high-risk foods. FDA has to designate what those high-risk foods are by a certain date, and they have to propose regulations by, so basically 1 year for FDA to identify the food that they consider to be high risk, and then a year later they have to propose regulations with regard to inspection of these records. So you can expect to see FDA in this area of what do they think a high-risk food is and why it matters. It matters because if you happen to be involved in one of these high-risk foods, then FDA would begin to reach records, more expansive records with respect to that. But it's unclear as to what they'll be at this point. FDA has to write the regs.